Welcome, everyone. We continue our series entitled League of Women Voters Empowering You, a program designed by the League of Women Voters in partnership with Dayton Access Television to provide unbiased, nonpartisan information on issues relevant to our friends and neighbors in the Dayton community. My name is David Bodary. I am a League of Women Voter member and your host this evening as we discuss our topic, League of Women Voters Empowering You, an update on the Greater Dayton League of Women Voters. Our guest today is Chris Corba. Chris is Executive Director of the Greater Dayton League of Women Voters. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
I am so glad to be with you, and I'm also so glad that we have gotten past the first Tuesday in November.
You can't even begin to imagine how relieved we all are. It's been a very long 6 months with actually it's been since last August. We've had 3 elections for 2 years in a row. Our poor boards of elections are absolutely exhausted, and now we have a breather for maybe a week, and then we start into new stuff.
Right. So, well, thank you for joining me because I'm sure you're exhausted, but I also chose not to invite Jeff Rezebeck back because I knew that he would be exhausted as a Board of Elections official. So our hope is that today we can talk about some of the things that have happened in those previous 3 elections that occurred in 2023, and then maybe take a moment to look forward a little bit to 2024, because while we feel good and we can take a deep breath now that we've gotten through these 3 elections, there's more to come.
There is a lot more to come. A lot more to come, yes.
So 3 elections in a year, and the first election was back in May, where for the first time new voter laws were required, specifically ID voter laws were required. Jeff and I sat in these very chairs and we talked about that, but I'm curious from your perspective as the Executive Director of the League, how did that work? How were those new voter laws sort of received? And were there any situations that the League encountered that maybe struggled or people struggled with?
Well, I think that, in terms of struggles, the new voter ID laws took effect in May. And traditionally, May elections are a lower turnout.
Yeah,
so there was I think between 8 and 10% of voters turned out for that May election. And there were some glitches. People didn't have their correct ID. They didn't understand what was appropriate, what wasn't appropriate anymore. But I think in August, when we had the special election regarding the constitutional amendment that would limit the ability for citizens to add an amendment or to petition for an amendment to be added to our Ohio Constitution, there were so many people that showed up at the polls because traditionally, if something that's important to voters, it's going to get them out there. And this past summer, comparatively to the May election, there were about 30% turnout. There was a 30% turnout, which was amazing. I think some folks thought that it would be a very low turnout. That was not the case. And as a result of that, I think some of that confusion about voter ID started to bubble up. The main issue I think that a lot of people had was that their driver's license was expired.
I was going to say that happened while I was voting. Somebody ahead of me who I knew, his license had expired. As it turns out, it worked out fine for him because his wife was carrying the unexpired license. So
his unexpired license.
He had one that was on his person, but his wife had planned ahead and she was carrying his unexpired. But I recognize that it can happen. I lapsed my license and now my vote may not be able to be accepted.
Well, they should always allow you to have a provisional ballot. And so what could happen if you were voting early, for example, at the Board of Elections? Generally, the DMV is right there. So you could go upstairs, go ahead and get your license renewed, take your piece of paper with you, and that would be good to go for you as far as your ID is concerned. But in the past, people were very used to being able to bring along a a bill
Utility.
from a utility bill, something like that, and that was no longer accepted.
Correct. So now the items that are expected or accepted would include a state issue ID or a number of federal issue ID that include a photograph
Correct.
of the voter that wishes to use that. So,
And now you're able to use your passport as well.
Right.
So,
which of course does include a photograph as well.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I understand this is all in an effort to try to ensure some level of voter security, voter integrity, but at the same time, the change has created a little bit of ripple so that we've got to now learn the new process.
and some of the poll workers weren't fully acquainted with the new laws either, and so that caused confusion as well for voters.
So we move from May into August. The August election gets a pretty good voter turnout, especially given that there was really only one issue to vote on.
Exactly.
And so yet we got 30+% of
Yes.
the registered voters to participate. Of course, our goal as league members is to try to ensure that all the voting public will participate in every election.
Exactly.
And in fact, in November, we saw an even larger percentage of people
Exactly.
participate.
And I was looking at some old statistics, and in 2020 there was about a 75% turnout, but that was a presidential election. And so what we tend to see is that for those presidential elections we get a greater turnout, but the League of Women Voters wants to remind everyone that every year is an election year, and quite frankly, those local elections are incredibly important because the people that you elect during a local election are the people that are going to touch your lives on a day-to-day basis. So it's your school boards, it's your city councils, it's your mayors, it's those folks that are going to be making decisions that affect your life and your children's lives.
And sometimes it's the judges, right?
Judges,
that might
yes.
hear a case or a circumstance that is related to you or a family member or the people in your community.
Yes.
So absolutely, local elections are where it's at, and those do happen every year in some
Exactly.
capacity. So
And honestly, though, this particular election is an off year. Again, you vote every year, but this isn't a presidential year. And the last I saw, there was about a 48% turnout, which is
high.
high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was pleased to see it. Of course, I'd be more pleased to see every voter, every election. We've said that now 3 times, but I was definitely pleased to see high voter turnout. And of course, in a year or in an election where we had 2 statewide issues, important to get more people participating because then that decision is more representative of the full voting state members, as opposed to in a time when maybe there's fewer people that are bound to participate. Then essentially what could happen is the minority of the people, the fewest of the people, would then enact something that could affect all the people. So participate, please participate in every election.
Yes.
So, all right, we've gone through May, we took a look at the voter ID, we've thought a little bit about some of these importance of the local elections. Maybe it's a good time to remind people about what it takes to become registered to vote.
It's pretty easy. You can go online, go to the Secretary of State's website and look for register to vote, and you can do it right there online. You can go to any library to register to vote. You can go to your DMV to vote. You can go to your Board of Elections to vote. And then the League of Women Voters, we are always out and about in the community, providing information to voters prior to the election and making sure that you have all the information that you need to make a good decision when you go out to the polls, and first of course, register to vote.
Right. So that being registered to vote is the first step, and if you're not registered to vote, or if you're not sure if you're registered to vote, it wouldn't hurt to then follow up and check on that. And there are ways that you can check using the Board of Elections website.
Yep.
I use vote411.org as well to kind of help to make sure that I know what I'll be voting on.
Or you can call our office, and we are happy to help. And the thing about getting registered to vote, though, too, which is also very important, you need to be registered to vote at least 30 days before an election. We have some folks that get frustrated. They want to register to vote, but that deadline is very strict. So you can register to vote within that 30-day period, but you're not going to be able to vote until the next election.
Correct. So you must be registered to vote 30 days in advance of whatever election is upcoming. This is a perfect time, right? November, after this primary election, is perfect time to register to vote. Or maybe as a Christmas present to yourself, a January 1st reminder to yourself that you can get registered to vote so that you can fully participate in every election. All right, so we've talked a little bit about what's happened in 2023. We've talked about reminding people the importance of registering to vote. So what's going to happen in 2024?
Well, we have lots of stuff coming up in 2024. First and foremost, it's a presidential year. The primaries are going to take place on March 19th here in Ohio. We'll see what's going to happen with that. We've got primaries for state representative, state senator, also our local senators and local representatives as well. Then, of course, the presidential primary as well. So that's going to take place on March 19th. Again, get registered to vote now so that you're able to vote in March. This is also a good time to request an absentee ballot if you would like to do that as well. And you can request absentee ballots for the full year. You have to fill out an absentee ballot request for each election that you're interested in voting in, but this is a good time to request those absentee ballots as well.
I had no idea. So even though we are not currently in that election cycle, we don't have it on the horizon yet. It's not till March.
Start asking January 1.
But I could, on January 1st, request absentee ballot to participate in the primaries. Well, that's amazing. Okay. And of course, the primaries are more important oftentimes than we recognize because the primaries will determine who ends up on the ballot
in November. Exactly.
So, and if you're not participating in a primary, then you're missing your opportunity to have a say in who makes it to the final ballot.
Exactly. And the other thing that's going on this year for the League of Women Voters is we are doing another citizen-led initiative along with people, not politicians, to get the redistricting process under control again.
Right.
And that's going to take another amendment. And so the League of Women Voters, alongside other organizations throughout the state, are going to start taking signatures. And we're going to probably be starting that process next week.
Wow.
And this is an opportunity not only for League members to participate to collect these signatures, but for the community as well. And so if anyone is interested in helping with that process, we encourage you to give the League a call. We'll make sure that we get you connected with our redistricting chairperson and get you the information that you need to be able to collect signatures. We are particularly interested in knowing if there are folks that are in Clark County that would like to help with this process, Miami County. We don't have a League presence in either of those counties.
Okay.
But we need to have we need to have the
Signatures.
citizens of those counties have their say as well.
Sure. So I want to remind the viewers about what we're talking about here. When there is a census, then there is a redistricting process because the number of representatives could change in a census. And in fact, the state lost one representative in that process. And then we have to figure out, well, then which of the remaining representatives are going to represent the citizens in which areas. And so we redistrict all the areas around the state. This is called redistricting.
And we had a process in place. In 2015 and 2018, the citizens of Ohio overwhelmingly voted to restructure the redistricting process. They wanted to end gerrymandering. And if anyone has been following along for the past couple of years, that didn't happen. Unfortunately, we still have the same gerrymandered districts that we had before. In some cases, they're even worse than they were before. And as a response to that effort, what's going to happen, and it's being spearheaded by former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, who was one of the people that spoke out about the process that was undertaken back in 2021, 2022. And what will happen as a result of this particular effort is that instead of politicians being involved in drawing the maps, the folks that are part of this process do not have any attachment to a political activity. So you can't be a former representative. You cannot be a lobbyist. It will be made up of 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 5 independents. And that group of people will be very carefully vetted to make sure that their interests are purely in making sure that the districts that are drawn are as fair as they can possibly be.
And I want to make sure you correct me on this. Currently, 5 people decide that district representation, right?
Correct.
But those 5 people include Governor DeWine, John Husted, Secretary of State, and
No,
then...
well, Frank LaRose, Secretary
Oh,
of
I'm
State.
sorry, Frank LaRose, Secretary of State. Thank you. So Governor DeWine, Frank LaRose, and then
Mr. Farber,
who is
who's
a
the state auditor.
state auditor? Is he Republican?
He is a Republican.
And then there were also
2 Democrats.
2 Democrats. But what does that mean? It means that in the end, Republicans versus Democrats have a majority rule in this decision-making process, which allows them to manipulate, slice and dice, depending on what language you like to use, such that districts could then misrepresent the whole.
Correct.
And in fact, that's what we've seen, and it's been demonstrated repeatedly, that the citizens represented in those districts aren't always then sort of reflected in the results or the outcomes that are emanating, based on the way the district is sliced and diced.
And right now in Ohio, it's about 54% Republican, 46% Democrat. And, but that leaves some wiggle room for the ability to have some competition. And right now in a lot of those districts, there is no competition. And I think it's also important to remember that it's not just Republicans who tend to do this in a certain way.
Correct.
The League of Women Voters has been working for fair districts since the early 80s. And back in the early 80s, if people were in Ohio back then, the Democratic Party was in control of the State House and the Senate and the governorship. Yeah. And so back then, they weren't interested in having this happen. So the bottom line is that the League of Women Voters wants to make sure that there's a fair playing field for everyone.
And I made some notes for myself because I thought the language was important to use. So the League continues to support creating representational district maps. That is to say, in a nonpartisan way, limiting the gerrymandering effects of the past practices. And so I appreciate that we'll be working again, gathering signatures to try to move us away from politically staffed decision makers, but instead move to independent decision makers for the redistricting process.
Yes.
That's the goal, and we think we can do it.
I believe we can.
And we think it's worth doing. And so we look forward to many people, hopefully many of the viewers, participating by signing a petition or calling the League office and saying, hey, how do I get a hold of one of those signature forms so that I can gather signatures in my own community? Yep. If you think democracy is worth this effort, and we hope you do, then we certainly will encourage you to contact the League and support that effort. How can people learn more if they are interested?
Right now we are in the process of figuring out all of the logistics of how this is all going to work. And we will have more information probably in about a week.
Okay.
And they can call our League offices at 937-228-4041. Happy to help in any way we can.
Yes, 937-228-4041. That is the Greater Dayton League of Women Voters main office located downtown Dayton.
Yep.
All right, so lots of important work to be done. It is going to be a presidential election year. The primaries are essential in terms of determining who ends up on the ballot. We don't have our gerrymandered districts fixed yet. But I want to encourage everyone to participate. The more people that participate, the more likely then the outcomes will represent the voices and the views of those people that have participated. When you don't participate, then you miss an opportunity to say, hey, wait, my voice matters. I've listened to my neighbors. I've made a decision. I try to make sure that I represent that, my community at least, in the voice or the vote that I then submit.
And an educated voter is of the utmost of importance. It's incredibly important that you take a look at issues rather than personalities. For the most part, you need to make sure that whoever you're voting for aligns with your beliefs, and that's what the League of Women Voters is here for as well. We present an unbiased, nonpartisan opportunity to learn about candidates and also issues as well. So we want to make sure that you understand the pros and the cons.
Right. It's important, and in fact, I think when I looked at the voter guide, I was really pleased to see a substantial number of the candidates were providing that background information that is requested through the League. We do it every time. Not every time do people respond. But what they respond with, right, we provide. And so that voter guide is there in support of decision-making, informed decision-making.
And every candidate who's in a contested race is invited to participate in our voters guide, as well as the recorded forums that we happen to do here at DATV. We just really encourage all of the candidates to participate in some way, shape, or form, either in the voters guide or a forum or interviews.
Absolutely. And I was really pleased as well, because I do get the Dayton Daily News delivered to my home, to see that the voter guide was indeed included by the Dayton Daily News. So shout out to the Dayton Daily. Thank you for providing the voter guide through the League of Women Voters, again, with your delivery of the paper. That's huge to me, and I think to many of the members of our community. So that's I've talked about it many times. Local journalism matters to our democracy, and so
we are very blessed.
Yeah.
There are not many local newspapers left in Ohio right now, and we have an outstanding local newspaper.
Yeah. So we've talked about 2023. We've talked a bit about 2024. We've talked a bit about the redistricting. What have I forgotten to ask? Is there anything else you want to share?
Well, we have fun stuff that's coming up too. Yeah. We will be sponsoring our Capital Chat, which is going to be coming up in January. And we are very excited about the 2024 Dangerous Dames of Dayton event that will take place on March 26th. We are still in the process of winnowing down who our Dangerous Dames are going to be, but we do have a very exciting keynote speaker, Aisha Roscoe from NPR's Sunday morning show is going to be our keynote speaker. So we're very excited to host her.
Good job for landing Aisha. That's wonderful.
Well, we have to thank our friends at WYSO as well, who are helping with this process and are going to be one of our media sponsors too.
And do we have a location for that, or is that to be determined?
We are still working on all the details about that
that's
right
good.
now. Yeah.
And then Capital Chat. Who do we know who will be joining us for Capital Chat?
We're still working on some.
We're hoping our local elected officials will join us.
Last year we invited some journalists, which was really a lot of fun too. So I've called a couple of journalists, and we're still in the process of figuring that all out right now.
Well, I appreciate that too. Capital Chat is a ton of fun.
It is. And you get the behind-the-scenes look at what's going on in Columbus.
And so how do you learn more? Well, first you could become a League of Women Voter member. You could also go to the League of Women Voters website. So it's not hard to find that.
We're everywhere.
Thing called Google, and you can find us pretty easily. Democracy requires us to be engaged and active, not to be passive bystanders. So this isn't like football games where you can be engaged and a spectator in the sport. It really starts first by becoming a registered voter, and then continuing as we educate ourselves to vote, and then obviously become active participants in every election. There's substantial work that still needs to be done, and of course we're still working to advance our efforts toward creation of a more perfect union. I appreciate, Chris, your efforts to ensure that our democracy continues to thrive, not just survive. And I want to thank you. Chris Corba, our Executive Director for the local Greater Dayton League of Women Voters. I've enjoyed our conversation.
I always enjoy talking with you, David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
The League of Women Voters encourages everyone to participate in every election. If you have further questions regarding this or any of our upcoming programs, you can contact the League by emailing league@lwvdayton.org or by calling the office. That's 937-228-4041. So the phone is 937-228-4041. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Be well.